Pull up a chair and grab your coffee, Arkansas Lounge family, because today's story is a roller coaster. If you've ever had your biggest supporters flip the script, then you'll know exactly how I felt when my Ivy League dream turned me into the villain. Let me take you back 2 years to the moment when everything changed. I'm Alex, 20M, and 2 years ago, I cut off my family. Well, specifically my mom and her husband. Others? They don't even register on my radar anymore. It all started when I received that life-changing email. I got accepted into one of the most prestigious Ivy League schools. That acceptance letter was my trophy, the result of years of sacrifice. I traded late-night parties for all-night study sessions, sleep for extracurriculars, and my mental health for straight A's. That email was my proof that it was all worth it. When I told my mom the news, she lit up like the 4th of July. We danced in the living room, laughing and hugging as if nothing in the world could go wrong. But the same news didn't sit well with her husband Greg and his son Ben. To give you some context, my dad passed away when I was 12. Mom remarried Greg 3 years later. Let's just say Greg was a walking red flag, and Ben, a carbon copy. Greg had this king of the castle mentality, and his priority was making sure Ben never felt less than. Ben, by the way, is a year older than me but has done absolutely nothing with his life. No studying, no working, no plans. Just a couch potato living off our parents. We coexisted in the same house, but I kept my distance. I didn't care what Ben did. His life was his own mess. But when Greg decided to meddle with mine, things got ugly. I shared the good news with Mom and Greg at dinner. Greg's reaction was immediate and unnerving. He gave Mom this weird look. Suddenly her enthusiasm evaporated and she sat down quietly, staring at her plate. Confused, I asked what was wrong. Greg said, "Oh, it's just so sudden. When did you even apply? And how do you plan to pay for this?" I explained that my dad had left money in a trust for my college tuition. It had been under Mom's control until I turned 18. Greg leaned back in his chair, his face tightening. "That money?" he asked, his voice low. "You should have talked to us about this first." I kept my tone polite. I wasn't sure I'd get in, so I didn't want to make a big deal until I had the results. Greg nodded, but it felt more like an interrogation than a conversation. He finally dropped it, but something in the air shifted. Later that night, I told Mom I'd need her to start the process of liquidating the fund. The next morning, Mom approached me nervously. Her words hit me like a slap. She wanted me to drop the idea of going to the Ivy League and attend a local community college instead. Her reasoning? She didn't want me to go far away. "I'm scared," she said, avoiding my eyes. I pressed her for the real reason. She broke down in tears, finally admitting, "Greg doesn't want you to go. He thinks it'll hurt Ben." Hurt Ben? That lazy bum who hadn't lifted a finger in his life? I was furious. Greg wasn't my father, and he sure as hell didn't get to dictate my future. I confronted Mom, yelling, "Why does his opinion matter more than my dreams?" Greg must have been eavesdropping because he barged into my room, trying to play the reasonable parent. He claimed he was proud of me, but insisted it wasn't fair that I got to attend an Ivy League school while Ben went to a community college. My jaw dropped. Fair? Ben hadn't done a damn thing to earn that opportunity. I had. When I called Ben out for being a freeloader, things escalated. Greg got angry, and Ben, who'd been lurking nearby, joined in. He shouted at me, calling me names, and even tried to swing a punch. I dodged, warning him that if he ever laid a hand on me again, I'd report his illegal activities to the cops. That shut him up quickly. Greg and Mom took their retaliation to the next level. Greg threatened to cut me off financially, claiming they wouldn't release the trust fund unless I agreed to stay. He even suggested I take a gap year to let Ben catch up. I turned to Mom, hoping she'd stand up for me, but she caved, sobbing. "We need to respect Greg's wishes. He's the head of the family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Head of the family? My ass!" I shouted before storming out of the house. I spent the night at a friend's place, too angry to return. When I finally did, Mom tried to guilt-trip me. She said my decision to go to the Ivy League was ruining her marriage. "Is your dream worth jeopardizing my relationship with Greg?" she asked. Her words gutted me. I realized then that I'd never have her support. She gave me an ultimatum: either stay and attend community college or leave for good. I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "How about this? You choose, me or Greg." She chose Greg. That night, I called my dad's lawyer. One call was all it took to get the trust fund released. With the documents and check in hand, I packed my bags and left for college. That was 2 years ago, and I haven't looked back since. When I left for college, I felt an odd mix of freedom and loss. I was stepping into a life I had worked so hard to build, but I had left behind a family that had become toxic. My mom's decision to side with Greg over me was a pain I couldn't fully process back then. But I shoved it aside, determined not to let it overshadow the opportunity I had fought tooth and nail to achieve. College life was intense. Just getting into an Ivy League school was one thing, but keeping up with the workload? That was another beast entirely. Classes were demanding, the competition was fierce, and there were days I barely slept. But I reminded myself that this was my shot to make something of myself, to prove to no one but me that I deserved to be here. In those first few months, I tried not to think about home. I ignored every text and call from my mom. She'd reach out with messages that ranged from "I miss you" to "You're breaking my heart," but I wasn't ready to respond. Every time I saw her name pop up on my phone, it brought back all the anger and betrayal. She wasn't apologizing for what she'd done. She just wanted to pull me back into her world. Greg didn't bother to reach out, which was no surprise, but Ben, he'd occasionally shoot me passive-aggressive texts, calling me selfish or accusing me of tearing the family apart. It was laughable. This guy who had spent his life doing nothing was now trying to paint himself as the victim. I blocked him eventually, because who has time for that kind of nonsense? The first year flew by, but not without its struggles. There were moments when I felt completely alone. Even though I had made friends and was thriving academically, there was a part of me that longed for the kind of support most students seem to have. Seeing parents at orientation, visiting on weekends, or sending care packages, it was a reminder of what I didn't have. But every time I felt a pang of sadness, I'd remember that I wasn't alone by choice. My family had pushed me out. They had prioritized their fragile egos and dysfunctional dynamics over my future. That thought kept me going. I wasn't about to let their decisions define me. Things took a turn about 6 months into my first year. My mom started ramping up her efforts to reconnect. She'd send me long texts apologizing for how things had gone down, claiming she missed me and just wanted to make things right. I didn't believe her, not for a second. She had chosen her side, and now she was facing the consequences of that choice. One text in particular stood out. She said, "Alex, I know I hurt you, but you have to understand, I was in a tough position. Greg is gone most of the time, and I was scared to lose my family again after your dad." That hit a nerve. It was the first time she'd acknowledged why she clung to Greg so tightly, but it didn't make it okay. I wasn't her emotional crutch, and I certainly wasn't responsible for holding her life together. By the time summer rolled around, I had settled into a rhythm. I stayed on campus, working a part-time job and taking summer courses to get ahead. It felt good to be busy, to be building something for myself. But then, out of nowhere, my mom showed up unannounced. I was sitting in the campus library when I got a call from the front desk. They told me my mom was there, waiting to see me. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to walk away and pretend I wasn't there, but another part of me felt like I needed to hear her out. When I got to the lobby, there she was, looking smaller than I remembered. She smiled when she saw me, but I didn't smile back. It was awkward. We ended up sitting at a cafe nearby, and for the first half hour she made small talk, asking about my classes, my friends, and my life. I answered her questions as politely as I could, but there was an unspoken tension hanging between us. Finally, she brought up the elephant in the room. "Alex, I just want to say I'm sorry," she began. "I should have stood by you. I see that now. Greg was—" She trailed off, searching for the right words. "He was difficult, and I didn't handle things the way I should have." I didn't say anything. I wanted to believe her, but something in her tone felt off, like she wasn't telling me the whole truth. She kept talking, saying how she missed me and wanted to fix our relationship, but then she dropped a bombshell. "I was wondering," she said hesitantly, "if you could reach out to Greg, maybe apologize for how things ended. He's been struggling, and it would mean a lot to me if you two could make peace." I stared at her, completely stunned. Apologize? For what? For going to college? For not letting him ruin my future? She looked uncomfortable. It's not about blame, she said. It's about moving forward. Greg didn't handle things well, but he's family, and families need to stick together. I laughed, but it wasn't out of humor. Greg isn't my family, I said firmly. He made that clear when he tried to sabotage my education, and you made it clear when you chose him over me. Her face crumpled, but I didn't feel bad. Not this time. I had spent years bending over backward to keep the peace, sacrificing my own happiness to make her life easier, and where had it gotten me? Alone, fighting for a future they didn't believe in. She tried to plead with me, saying how much it hurt her to see the family fall apart. But I cut her off. Mom, you made your choice. Now you have to live with it. I'm not responsible for fixing the mess you created. She left shortly after that, tears in her eyes. I watched her go, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. I knew I had done the right thing by standing my ground. But it still hurt. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of her attempts to claw her way back into my life and the chaos that would follow. After that encounter with my mom, I thought I'd closed the chapter on her attempts to wiggle her way back into my life. I figured she'd gotten the message that I wasn't interested in playing happy family or apologizing to Greg for, well, existing. For a while, things were quiet. I focused on school, my part-time job, and making a life for myself. I didn't block her number, but I stopped responding to her texts. I thought silence would send a clear enough signal. Fast forward to my second year of college, and things were looking up. I'd built a solid group of friends who felt more like family than my actual one ever did. My grades were strong, and I was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, I'd left all the drama behind. But of course, life had other plans. It started with small things. My mom would send cards on my birthday and holidays. Nothing elaborate, just generic thinking of you stuff. I ignored them. I'd long since stopped feeling sentimental about those gestures. Then came the voicemails. She'd leave these long, emotional messages about how much she missed me, how proud she was of everything I'd accomplished, and how she wanted to mend the fence. I deleted them without listening past the first sentence. But one day, I made the mistake of answering her call. It wasn't planned. I'd been in the middle of studying, and my phone buzzed on the desk. Without thinking, I picked it up. Her voice on the other end was shaky. "Alex, I just want to talk," she said. "Please don't hang up." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "What do you want, Mom?" She launched into a speech about how much she missed me, how lonely she'd been since I left, and how she regretted everything that had happened. For a second, I felt a twinge of sympathy. It couldn't have been easy for her, being stuck with Greg and Ben. But then she hit me with the real reason for her call. "I was thinking," she said cautiously, "your graduation is coming up soon, isn't it? I'd love to come. Maybe Greg could come too. It would mean so much to us to be there for you." I froze. It was like she'd learned absolutely nothing. "Are you serious right now?" I asked. "You think I want Greg anywhere near my graduation? After everything he did?" She hesitated, then said, "Alex, he's trying to change. He's had a hard time too, you know. It's not easy being a stepfather. He only wanted what was best for the family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Best for the family? You mean sabotaging my education, threatening to withhold my tuition money, and trying to guilt-trip me into giving up my dreams for his deadbeat son? That's your idea of best for the family? Her voice cracked. He didn't mean it like that. He was just scared. Scared of losing the balance in the family. I laughed bitterly. Balance? There was no balance, Mom. There was Greg and Ben, and then there was me. And every time you chose them, every single time. The conversation spiraled from here. She tried to guilt-trip me, saying I was being unfair, that families stick together no matter what. I told her families also support each other, and she had failed me when I needed her the most. Eventually, she hung up and I blocked her number. I couldn't keep letting her drag me back into that toxic cycle. But of course, Greg wasn't done with me either. About a week later, he called me out of the blue. At first, I didn't recognize the number, so I answered. "Big mistake, Alex," he started, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "Long time no talk. I hear you've been doing well for yourself. Got a fancy job lined up, huh?" I could already tell where this was going. "What do you want, Greg?" I asked flatly. He didn't bother with pretense. "You owe me, kid. You took all the money your mom and I saved up for the family. I needed that money for my business, and now you're sitting pretty while I'm struggling." I laughed out loud. That money wasn't yours, Greg. It was my dad's. He saved it for my education, and it was in his will. You had no claim to it then, and you sure as hell don't now. He didn't like that. His tone shifted from fake politeness to anger. Your mom told me she had savings when we got married. She promised to invest in my business, but then she gave it all to you. Do you know how that makes me look? Like a fool. That money was supposed to help us as a family. Funny, I replied. I don't remember you caring about family when you tried to stop me from going to college. You only cared about yourself and Ben. Don't pretend this is about anything else. What he said next caught me off guard. Your mom's been playing you, Alex. She's been trying to butter you up so you'd pay me back. She's desperate to fix this mess, but don't think for a second she's doing it for you. She's doing it for herself. That revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. I had always suspected my mom's motives weren't entirely pure, but hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. I didn't say another word to Greg. I just hung up and blocked his number for days. I couldn't shake the anger and betrayal I felt. My own mother, the one person who should have been in my corner, had been trying to manipulate me. She didn't care about my success or happiness. She cared about saving face with Greg. I sent her one final text before blocking her too. Greg told me everything. Don't contact me again. You're not my mom anymore. She tried calling, but I ignored it. I was done with her lies, her excuses, and her endless attempts to pull me back into her chaotic world. The betrayal stung, but it also strengthened my resolve. I was done looking for approval from people who didn't deserve it, done letting their toxicity invade the life I was building for myself. For a while, things seemed calm after I blocked both Greg and my mom. There were no calls, no texts, no unexpected messages popping up to ruin my day. It felt like I could finally breathe, like I had truly cut ties with the people who only dragged me down. My focus was on graduating, starting my career, and leaving all that drama in the rearview mirror. But just when I thought I was free, my mom found a way to disrupt my peace. She showed up at my workplace. I remember that day so clearly. I was at my desk, working on a project, when the receptionist called. "Hi, Alex. There's someone here asking for you. She says she's your mother." My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe she had the audacity to come here. She didn't know where I lived, and now I realized she had gone out of her way to track me down at work. I didn't want to make a scene, so I went down to the lobby. There she was, standing near the entrance, clutching her purse like she'd just walked into a lion's den. When she saw me, she broke into tears and tried to hug me. I stepped back instinctively, unsure of what to say or do. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Please, Alex, just for a few minutes." I didn't want to talk, but I also didn't want this to escalate in front of my coworkers. I nodded and told her to follow me to a nearby cafe. As we walked, she kept trying to make small talk, commenting on how grown up I looked and how proud she was of me. I didn't respond. My mind was racing, wondering what her angle was this time. At the cafe, I ordered a coffee and waited for her to speak. She fidgeted nervously, then finally blurted out, "Alex, I need your help. Greg and I are no longer together." I raised an eyebrow, not sure if I believed her. "What happened?" I asked flatly. She sighed dramatically. "He divorced me. He said I failed him, that I let him down by not getting the money back from you. He blamed me for everything, and now he's gone. I'm all alone, Alex." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me felt a flicker of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by everything she'd done. "So you're here because—" "What? You want me to feel sorry for you?" "No," she said quickly. "I'm here because I want to fix things between us. I made mistakes, Alex. I see that now. I should have supported you. I should have stood up to Greg, but I was scared. I didn't want to lose my family again after your dad." Her words sounded sincere, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there was more to the story. "You made your choice," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You chose Greg over me, over your own son, and now you're here because you're lonely, not because you care about what I've been through." Her face crumpled, and she started crying again. "I was trying to hold everything together, Alex. I thought if I could keep Greg happy, it would be better for all of us. I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know what else to do." And then came the kicker, the thing that confirmed all my suspicions. "I lied to him, you know," she said. her voice barely above a whisper. About the money. I told him I'd use it for his business, but I never intended to. That's why he got so angry. He felt betrayed, but I couldn't give him the money. Alex, it was yours. It always was. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. So you're telling me you lied to Greg, manipulated me, and tried to keep everyone happy, but in the end, you made all of this worse. And now you want me to forgive you. I just want us to be a family again, she pleaded. Greg is gone, Ben is off doing his own thing, and I only have you, Alex. Please, let's put this behind us. I shook my head. There was never a family, Mom. Not after Dad died. You didn't try to hold us together for me. You did it for yourself because you were afraid of being alone. And now you're here because your plan didn't work. You don't get to rewrite history and pretend you were doing it for my sake. Her tears turned to anger. I gave you everything, Alex. I supported you, even when it meant losing my marriage. And now you're throwing it back in my face? You didn't support me, I snapped. You tolerated me. You gave me the money because you had no choice, and even then you tried to manipulate me into giving it back. You think I don't know what you were doing? Greg spelt it out for me. She sat there stunned, unable to respond. I stood up, throwing a few bills on the table to cover our coffee. We're done here, Mom, I said. Don't come to my work again. Don't call me. Don't text me. You made your choice and now you have to live with it. As I walked away, I heard her call after me, her voice breaking. Alex, please, I'm your mother. But I didn't look back. I was done letting her guilt and manipulation control me. When I got back to the office, I went straight to the receptionist and told them not to let anyone claiming to be my family through again. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I knew I'd made the right choice, but it didn't make it any easier. After my mom's unexpected visit to my workplace, I felt drained. It wasn't just the emotional toll of seeing her. It was the reminder of everything I'd worked so hard to escape. The lies, the manipulation, the constant guilt-tripping. It was like she couldn't let go of the fantasy that we could somehow go back to being a family, even though she had torn that idea apart long ago. I focused on my work and tried to move forward. I blocked her number, told my receptionist to bar her from showing up again, and made it clear to myself that I wouldn't let her back into my life. It was harsh, but it was necessary. There's only so much you can take before you have to draw a line. Life kept moving, and so did I. My career was taking off, and I finally felt like I was on stable ground. I had a job I loved, co-workers I enjoyed being around, and friends who felt like the family I'd always wished for. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next wave of drama. But of course, it didn't end there. About 6 months later, my mom found another way to get through to me. This time, it wasn't a phone call or an unexpected visit. It was a handwritten letter. I found it in my mailbox one morning, and as soon as I saw her handwriting, my heart sank. I debated throwing it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was long. She poured her heart out, writing about how much she regretted everything, how lonely she was, how she'd made mistakes and wanted another chance to make things right. She even wrote about Greg, admitting that marrying him had been a mistake. I was so scared of being alone after your father passed, she wrote. I thought Greg could fill that void, but all he did was make things worse. She apologized for siding with Greg, for trying to manipulate me, and for failing to be the mother I needed. She wrote about how proud she was of everything I'd accomplished and how much she wished she could be a part of my life again. But then, toward the end, the tone shifted. She started talking about how hard it had been for her since the divorce, about how she was struggling financially and emotionally. And that's when it hit me. She wasn't writing to reconnect because she cared about me. She was writing because she needed something from me. She closed the letter with this. Alex, I know I've hurt you and I can never undo the damage I've caused, but I'm asking you to please find it in your heart to forgive me. I need you now more than ever. You're my son and I love you. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I didn't cry, I didn't feel angry, I just felt tired. It was the same pattern all over again. Every time she reached out, it was never truly about me. It was always about her guilt, her loneliness, her struggles. I couldn't do it anymore. I talked it over with one of my closest friends later that day. She listened patiently as I vented. You don't owe her anything, Alex. she said. "She's only reaching out because she knows you're doing well, and she wants to benefit from that. You've built a life without her, and you don't need her dragging you back into that mess." She was right. I knew she was right, but it didn't make it any easier. The next weekend I sat down with that letter and wrote one of my own. I kept it short, direct, and honest. I told her I appreciated the apology, but it wasn't enough to undo the damage. I told her I couldn't trust her anymore, that every time she reached out, it felt like she was trying to manipulate me rather than genuinely make amends. I told her I wasn't responsible for fixing her mistakes or her life, and that I needed to prioritize my own peace. I ended with this: "Mom, I love you, but I can't have you in my life anymore. Every time you reach out, it drags me back into a place I've worked so hard to leave behind. I wish you the best, but I need to move on. Please don't contact me again." I mailed the letter the next day and blocked her address from sending me anything further. It felt final, like closing a door I knew I wouldn't reopen. Since then, I've been focusing entirely on myself. My career continues to grow, and I'm proud of the life I've built. It's not perfect, and there are still moments when I feel the weight of everything I've been through, but I know I'm stronger for it. I've learned to set boundaries, to prioritize my well-being, and to let go of people who don't deserve a place in my life. Family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who show up for you, who support you, and who celebrate your successes without trying to tear you down. I may not have that kind of family in the traditional sense, but I've found it in the friends and community I've built around me. To anyone reading this who's struggling with toxic family dynamics, just know that it's okay to walk away. It's okay to prioritize yourself and your happiness. You're not selfish for wanting a life free from drama and pain. You deserve peace, and sometimes the hardest but most necessary thing is to let go. Story 2. Tonight, you will have to make your own food. When I got home from work that Friday night, my wife greeted me in that manner. Carelessly playing with an earring, Vanessa walked into the living room. "My pals and I are going out for a night of dancing." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was witnessing. As she looked away, she was wearing a short black dress with a plunging neckline and 4 spaghetti straps that crossed over her shoulders. I was enthralled with the way her skirt flowed elegantly over her thighs. Then I saw that Vanessa had opted out of wearing a bra, as evidenced by the exposed back. "Will you actually wear that clothing to a dance party? Why? What's wrong with my attire? It's quite stylish." Although I could feel my annoyance mounting, I knew that in order to speak with her successfully, I needed to be careful with the words I used. "Although there is nothing wrong with your attire, you should think about the attention it may draw, especially from some people." She gave a little snort. "If Nancy and I choose to dance with any males on our outing, I have no doubt that they will be perfectly polite. A certain amount of ambiguity is always present. Who knows? It's possible that one of them will be the ringmaster. And you really don't want to attract his attention, I assure you." The serial killer who had been terrorizing the neighborhood had been dubbed ringmaster by the media. In just 1 year, he had killed 8 innocent young ladies via horrific actions. The only hint the police had was that each woman had been found without her rings. There were rumors that the offender was collecting cosmetics. Vanessa mimicked the tone of a little girl's voice in her scornful retort. "Am I at risk of getting apprehended by the boogeyman?" Then her voice returned to its customary tone of contempt. "I find it funny that you're trying to influence me with mystical stories." An automobile horn outside noisily honked, just as she was going to elaborate. Frustrated, she said, "I don't have time for this. Nancy is present. Please don't wait for me." She vanished without a trace. "Oh no," I screamed, clenching my hands in despair as I stood by myself in the living room. This type of disrespect was getting to me more and more, and I wasn't sure how much more I could take. Even though I loved Vanessa, it seemed like our relationship had been deteriorating steadily for a while. What became of us? I couldn't help but wonder what had caused this terrible circumstance. When I made the decision to do my MBA after graduation, Vanessa had been a huge help. Because of her encouragement, we had a strong love and were both looking forward to the future. Taking a secretarial job allowed me to finish my degree in just 18 months. She had faced many obstacles along the way, and I will always be grateful for the selflessness she showed while I was looking for work. My brother Jimmy and I both inherited my father's firm after his death. Custom plastic components for industrial uses are preferred. Precision molding's area of expertise. Despite the company's slow slide, Jimmy and I were determined to bring it around since we saw promise in it. Jimmy now oversees operations while I concentrate on general management and sales. It's a distinct sector that prospers on solid relationships and producing outstanding outcomes. Jimmy and I gradually began to restore our reputation as trustworthy suppliers. Vanessa obviously had great hopes for my future, anticipating that I would wind up in a high-profile executive position in a Fortune 500 firm in a big city. I sensed her displeasure, even though she never said it. In any case, she endured my long hours and meager pay without raising an objection. She seized the opportunity to enter the advertising industry, though, and soon proved that she had a knack for it. For us, at first it was a good development. Our financial status significantly improved as a result of her rising salary. However, her general attitude improved as a result of her increasing confidence. But as time went on, our bond seemed to wane. She began spending more and more time with her new co-workers, especially Nancy, a divorced lady who I felt had a bad impact. However, as tonight's discussion made very evident, Vanessa was utterly indifferent to my concerns. She is completely unimportant to me. I believed that I would not squander time at home. I decided to phone my younger brother, eagerly awaiting her erratic arrival. "What are your plans for tonight, Jimmy?" "Okay, let's get together at Louie's. I need some companionship, and Vanessa isn't here." Because of the welcoming atmosphere and calming jazz music playing in the background, I always looked forward to going to Louis' to go with the cocktails. They also offered delectable burgers. Jimmy was waiting for me with a beer as I entered. He grinned and added, "I thought you could use one based on the tone of your voice." "Why are you so angry with your spouse this time?" I continued to think of Jimmy as my younger brother. But since we were 2 years apart in age, he had become as tall as me. I used to win all of our wrestling bouts back in the day. But now, I seriously doubt I could accomplish the same thing. He became into my closest confidant and valued friend. I sipped heavily from the mug and then looked up at him. "Why do you think I'm offended because of anything Vanessa did?" His face was knowing as he nodded. "You appear to have been thinking about Vanessa a lot recently. She's obviously getting to you, so I'm interested to know what's been going on between you two. Do you know when he didn't answer?" I sigh and shrug my shoulders nonchalantly. Before she began working for the Stevens agency, everything was going smoothly. At first, our connection was flourishing and she was excited about the chance. But our home life worsened as she immersed herself more in that setting and with her co-workers. She doesn't seem to respect me anymore. She always feels inferior to me, and she takes advantage of any opportunity to put space between us. To be honest, I'm starting to wonder why we got married. He put his hands over his heart and smirked as he looked at me. "I can appreciate the rationale behind your choice to wed her. My companion." I was so disgusted that I had to shake my head. "You were always full of adventure. In any case, I'm also not feeling very excited about that area of my life, nowadays. With this circumstance, I'm at my breaking point." Jimmy looked over and signaled to the waitress that he would like another drink. "Do you think Vanessa could be cheating on you?" he said as he came in close after she gave it over. My face contorted into a grimace as I took another swallow. "That's exactly what I thought. My main problem is figuring out if she's having an affair or just making new friends when she's out with that cheating Nancy." I took another sip to try to calm myself, since I could feel my fury growing. When she started her new work, our relationship took a turn for the worst. Looking back, she now frequently arrives at the workplace on the weekends or works late. I'm left wondering if she and the coworker are involved in something more. My suspicions are bolstered by the fact that she often goes out with Nancy but keeps quiet about their locations and return time. She insisted on having a shower when she arrived last weekend, and she didn't come back until after I had gone to bed. I found her justification for wanting to get rid of the cigarette smoke smell suspicious. Jimmy looked at me questioningly. "Are the two of you about to part ways?" The beer cups jumped as I slammed my fist down hard on the table. It's, to put it mildly, annoying. The prospect of her treachery is perhaps more distressing than the lack of respect itself. if I choose to dissolve the marriage, things get much more problematic. She will ultimately receive half of my stake in the company once we divide our assets. Mickey, wow. That's a shame, particularly in light of the encouraging momentum we've been enjoying. We stand to gain a great deal from the order you obtained last week. I get that, buddy, and it genuinely irritates me to think that she would take a sizable chunk of what we've worked so hard to achieve. As the evening went on, I became so engrossed in my fervent tirade that I forgot how many drinks I had had. I never found time for a dinner, although the number didn't seem substantial. I vaguely remember Jimmy helping me get to my vehicle and driving me home at one point. He led me carefully into the bedroom and laid me down on the bed. The last thing I remembered was taking off my shoes. On Saturday, I woke up at midday. Oh, I had a bad taste in my mouth and a pounding headache. I went to the loo, got a glass of water, and took a couple of aspirin. After that, I hurried to the kitchen to start making breakfast. I chose to contact my brother after I completed my dinner, keeping in mind that the acid in my stomach may cause some difficulty. When Jimmy heard my voice, he started laughing. I wanted to know whether you were still awake. Whoa, what a crazy night you had. Hello, thank you very much for making sure I arrived home safely yesterday night. However, I'm a little worried about what I might have done. I don't remember ever being completely dark like that. Not even when I was a college student. By the way, how much did I drink in the end? He chuckled again. All of this is included with the service. Keep in mind that you owe me. Then something changed in his voice. When you eventually got up, how did Vanessa react? I became alert. I haven't seen her, Jimmy. When I woke up, she was most obviously not in bed. As I talked to him, I got up from the table and began to move around the house, just to be sure. She didn't come home last night, I think. Her car is still parked in the garage, and she is most definitely not there right now. It looks like she could have decided to stay out all night. I am quite irritated by this circumstance and find it hard to put up with such disrespect for our relationship. Hold on a second, my brother. Perhaps she has a good reason for doing this. She could have spent some time at Nancy's place. How about you try calling them? No, she's got a phone. She can give me a call. I'm fed up with constantly trying to locate a wife on my own. My buddy, I can appreciate your point of view, but it would be prudent to wait to make any conclusions until you and the other person have had a chance to have a meaningful discussion. Although I can appreciate your viewpoint, I would personally rather she didn't come anytime soon. Right now, I'm really upset with her, and I'm not sure how I would respond. Aside from that, thank you for your help. Last evening, I'm going to try to relax now by doing some garden work. After hanging up, I hurriedly changed into my work trousers and headed to the garage to get the lawnmower. I was surprised to see my work boots fully covered in muck as I was getting ready to put them on. Where in the world did that originate, I was left wondering. Cleaning up after myself is something I always do. I find that cutting the lawn gives me a lot of free time to think and contemplate. This time, though, I couldn't help but think of Vanessa and how annoyed I was by her previous actions. This is utterly contemptuous in addition to being disrespectful. Although I don't care about her private life, I will not put up with this type of abuse from her. I instantly checked my phone after finishing my garden work to make sure I hadn't missed any calls from her. There were no unanswered calls. I didn't get any messages. I went to the kitchen to make a tasty meal with some leftover items after watching a baseball game on TV. I later sat down in front of the television to watch a previously viewed film again. Thrilling story about heroes fighting off zombie hordes. Exactly what I was feeling. I became more and more frustrated as the night went on. Then I switched off the TV and grabbed my phone. Okay, you're the winner. Unfortunately, all I got when I tried to contact her was a message saying that the phone was out of service. I couldn't get through to her because she purposefully turned off her phone. Mind-blowing. After undressing and getting into bed, it felt like a lifetime before I eventually fell asleep. I was a little confused when I woke up in the morning. I could sense the dampness of the sheets and the moisture on my skin. My mood was unsettled and dismal, which made things worse. I had the impression that I had spent the entire evening engrossed in an engrossing novel, and the plot had a profound effect on me. I couldn't remember a lot of details, but the intense rage I had for Vanessa was what I remembered. No, I was possessed with a deep and strong hatred rather than anger. It was unnerving to remember how strongly I felt. Even after eating breakfast and coffee, the eerie recollections of those nightmares persisted, making me feel guilty. When I tried to reach Vanessa again, the well-known out-of-service notice appeared. I made the reluctant decision to call Nancy. She took a few minutes to recognize me, so it was obvious that I had surprised her. Nancy, hello. Are you with Vanessa? No, she isn't. Did she accompany you yesterday? Oh, I thought she was gone already. Is she not there yet? I must know, Nancy. How recently did you see Vanessa? We ended up dancing all night long at singles and doubles on a Friday night. The very lackluster singles and doubles was an interesting place to be, in my opinion. When did you leave? There was stillness for a while. As it happens, I left after midnight. Did Vanessa accompany you? A longer silence. Well, I met a gentleman who piqued my interest in a fairly interesting way. But Vanessa was having so much fun that she chose to stay a little while later. I grabbed the chance to depart with the gentleman after she promised to set up an Uber when she was ready. You haven't spoken to her since then? No, I haven't. Look, I'm starting to worry, Mickey. I'm getting nervous because of you. Do you mean that she hasn't gotten back to you at all this weekend? I apologize, Nancy, but right now I'm terribly pushed for time. I need to concentrate on finding a wife. I cursed a series of words in fury as I hung up the phone. I called Jimmy right away and told him what Nancy had said in her voicemail. That doesn't sound good, dude. Perhaps you ought to think about reporting her missing to the police. Yes, I do comprehend. I'll get back to you when they respond. That was a really dismal outcome. The officer quickly called police headquarters and asked where Vanessa had been last seen. On Friday night, I told him the news, but he cut me off in the middle. Hey, buddy, until she has been gone for at least 3 days, you are not permitted to report her missing. Officer, she hasn't been in contact with me or her closest friend over the weekend. The possibility that something happened to her worries me a lot. Listen, he said, you don't have to worry. I have seen this situation several times. It's likely that you'll hear from her soon and everything will be all right. Just give it a little more time. I hung up. Maybe he was right, but I was still uncomfortable. This was totally unlike of her. Could she have been involved in an accident? Wouldn't the doctors contact me if she was? But I reasoned that it wouldn't harm to try. I made the decision to contact the nearby hospitals. No unidentifiable female patients were present, and Vanessa was not registered at any of the locations. Another terrible result. As I waited, I went out to get some lunch for myself and then hurried home to eat it in case Vanessa showed up. I turned on the television again in an attempt to distract myself, but I was unable to concentrate. After a while, I made the decision to end the evening and went to bed. In some ways, Sunday evening was more difficult than Saturday. I started tossing and turning in my sleep again. What could be more disturbing? This time I was stuck in the middle of a thick forest and kept having the same dream. I felt like I was carrying a heavy load. I didn't become upset. Rather, I felt a wave of sorrow and hopelessness. The world was still covered in darkness when I awoke. I forced myself to get out of bed, despite the weight of my melancholy. Having had my breakfast and had several glasses of coffee, I slowly started to shake off the apprehension. I called Jaime around 7:30 in the morning. Hello, I wanted to inform you that I may be a little late this morning. Vanessa doesn't appear to be anywhere. When her office opens, I'll attempt contacting her in case she's there. I'll go to police headquarters and demand to talk to someone if she isn't okay. I will remain here and maintain order. I wish you luck, pal, and maintain your optimism. I made the decision to phone the Stevens agency after half an hour. Luckily, I managed to get in touch with Frankie, who was Vanessa's personal assistant. I couldn't help but feel jealous of Vanessa for having a male personal assistant after hearing about Frankie. Vanessa laughed and called me a sexist. My perspective of Vanessa's humor changed when I met Frankie at a business function. Frankie was actually Francesca's nickname. Frankie stood out from other ladies because of her distinct appeal. Her towering stature and powerful angular build gave her a distinctive physique. To be honest, she looked like she could play linebacker for a college football team with ease. She was also a very strong woman. Her grasp was rather strong when we initially shook hands, which surprised me. I was fascinated by Frankie's unshakable commitment to Vanessa. I thought Frankie would identify as homosexual because of their interactions, which made it obvious that he had become fond of my wife. Once I asked Vanessa about it, and she just laughed. The fact that she is a lesbian doesn't worry me. She's actually a great fit for my personal assistant position, which is intriguing. She's really committed to helping me and goes above and beyond. It's almost like having a faithful friend instead of a coworker. I was startled out of my reverie by Frankie's contralto voice on the phone. It quote, S. Mickey Duncan, Frankie. Has Vanessa reached the workplace yet? It's a pleasure to talk to you, Mr. Duncan. Regretfully, your wife is still not here. When she does, would you like me to leave a message for her to call you? Yes, if we could give Ash a call first thing in the morning, that would be fantastic. There was a change in my voice that Frankie appeared to detect. How are things going, Mr. Duncan? Unfortunately, I ended up telling Frankie everything. We got into a violent dispute when she went out on Friday, and she didn't communicate at all throughout the weekend. Frankie paid close attention until I was done. Her voice was hardly audible above a whisper when she eventually spoke. She said in a worried tone, It truly saddens me to hear that. She lowered her voice even farther. There are some worrying things going on here, but I can't talk about it right now. I would advise going to see Mr. Stevens to find out the truth about Vanessa's circumstances if I were in your shoes. Suddenly, the volume and tone of her voice restored to normal. Indeed, sir. Yes. Later this morning, Mr. Stevens will be in the office. For now, goodbye. I sat there gripping the dead phone, my annoyance growing since I first saw David Stevens. It was impossible for me not to feel uneasy. His sleek look and confident manner conveyed a sense of assurance. He never missed an opportunity to brag about himself or his advertising firm, and he didn't hesitate to disparage others in the process. He may have been successful in advertising because of such traits, but in my view, they simply made him appear insecure and unlikable as a person. When Frankie recommended that I ask Danny my questions, I couldn't help but wonder what she was referring about. David. I had a gut feeling that I knew, and I was going to face him right away. I had to get to police headquarters first, though. A woman finally came out to help me after a bit of a commotion with the uncooperative sergeant at the front desk. My name is Nora Marshall, the detective. After the sergeant had informed her of my predicament, she introduced herself. She seemed young and inexperienced, yet there was an openness to hearing. I was intrigued, so I went to her desk with her. I told her my tale again, but she didn't seem very interested. She leaned back in her chair and suppressed a yawn when I showed her a photo of Vanessa, as if she didn't care. That, for me, was the last straw. Listen, perhaps you might think about letting me talk to someone who genuinely cares whether you were out having a great time at the party over the weekend. Her eyes gleamed as she leaned forward. If you think I don't care, Mr. Duncan, you're wrong. I truly care, which is why I picked this career. Regarding my story, it resulted from spending the night looking for a mentally ill young woman who had strayed from her group home while on duty for the whole weekend. Therefore, kindly reevaluate your presumptions and provide an explanation for why you think your wife's absence differs from previous occurrences. I didn't feel well after that, but I managed to gather myself and tried to explain why I was so concerned about Vanessa's absence. Although she seldom stays out all night and has never been gone for a full weekend, she has gone out with her girlfriend in the past. What is her frequency of going out alone? A feeling of unease washed over me. It seems to occur practically every weekend these days. Marshall made a brief note on the pad and then looked at me thoughtfully. Describe your connection with your wife for me. I thought the storyline in this was really engaging, she said. I was interested in the story from start to finish because of the way it developed. It was a very delightful experience. I sighed as I looked down at the desk. Listen, I want to tell you the truth. Lately things have been a little erratic. I gave her a quick look. She seems to no longer care about me. You know, I was really drawn in by the narrative in this. I was interested and curious about the story's development. The author has a talent for developing tension and compelling characters. It was a really pleasant read all around. Are you two ever at odds? The narrative really captivated me. I was interested in the story the entire time because of how it developed. It was a very delightful experience. Yes, there have occasionally been heated arguments between us. Have you ever hurt her? This had really engaging storytelling in my opinion. I was interested and curious about the story's development. It was a very delightful experience. I was surprised. I would never do it, I'm afraid. She waited patiently for me to go on, but I couldn't think of anything. She eventually let out a sigh. Excellent, Mr. Duncan. I'll make sure your wife's picture is sent to our street patrol and add her details to our missing people list. I quote, I'll give you a call if we find anything. The words escaped my lips before I could stop them, even though I hadn't meant to speak. Are you of the opinion that she might have met and listened to this ringmaster character? Although I can appreciate your worries, you shouldn't allow your mind go wild with improbable scenarios. The missing spouse usually just choose to spend some time alone in situations like these. They eventually realize that it is just not possible to resolve their problems from a distance, so they go back home. You should quit worrying and return to your work, in my opinion. Let the professionals find your wife and return her securely. Okay, this had really engaging storytelling, in my opinion. I was interested and curious about the story's development. It was a very delightful experience. I nodded grudgingly. She took a little card out of her pocket and gave it to him. Here are my contact details, she said. Call me day or night if she gets home or if you hear from her. She gave me the card. Even though it might not seem like it to you, we actually care. I nodded slightly as I took the card. Okay, thank you, Detective Marshall. As soon as I left, I called Jimmy to tell him what I was doing, and then headed straight for the Stevens agency. I already had my suspicions about David Stevens, and Frankie's mysterious comments just made me want to confront him. Because she knew me, the receptionist gave me access. I was walking by Vanessa's workplace. I stopped for a moment to give Frankie a silent look. She shook her head subtly in response. Okay, I said in a whisper. The need to face Stevens seems to have arisen. She took hold of my hand. I wish you luck, she whispered. Distractedly rubbing my fingertips, I walked down the hall to Stevens's office. Whoa, what a powerful woman she is. I went to his secretary's desk and she said, Oh, Mr. Duncan Stevens, is he free? When I asked, her face became irritated. Yes, but he's busy right now. And wait, you're not permitted inside. However, I had previously seen Stevens talking on the phone, the moment he spotted me and the expression on my face. He talked into the phone, hastily. I quote, LL have to stop the conversation and get back to you. He got to his feet and feigned a grin. What a nice surprise, Mickey. Come in and sit down, please. He pointed to the roomy couch at his workspace. Captivated by what he was saying, I sat down and leaned in. This visit is not amicable. I want to know what's going on between you and my wife, Stevens. A moment of uncertainty passed in his eyes, but his grin did not falter. Vanessa, our business has been greatly impacted by your wife. Her eagerness to take on any task that is presented to her is really motivating. Her ability to take on challenging issues head-on and successfully resolve them has often impressed me. That couch was really where I got the chance to deliver her performance review only last week. Don quote, T-worry. She went above and above in every way. He smiled at me knowingly. I consider myself lucky to have her on my team. My rage increased as I continued to listen and see that arrogant smile. They're mocking me, that individual. I got up from the couch to face him, and he was brazenly talking about his meeting with Vanessa. As I drew it out, my fingertips brushed against something unexpected that was concealed between the cushions. I found myself clutching a pair of fragile pants. I looked at them again, and suddenly, without hesitation, I gasped. They were definitely a part of the set I gave Vanessa for Valentine's Day last year. Coolly, Stevens leaned over and quickly removed them from my hands. Well, it looks like the cleaning team has been enjoying themselves. He choked. His office door suddenly sprang open, and a uniformed guard stepped inside. This is the ideal time for you to be here. Stevens nodded to the man. Mr. Duncan was on his way out. Wait a moment. Stevens, we still have a lot more to talk about. I'm sorry, Mickey, but it appears that you have a very full calendar already. He pointed to the sentry. Please lead Mr. Duncan out the door. The man indicated the door and beckoned for me to follow. I thought about protesting at first, then changed my mind. I looked back at Stevens as I bounded out of his office. This is not yet complete. By no means. There was no sign of Frankie. I was walking down the corridor. Maybe it was better that way. I was still fuming with rage as I went outside to my car. I checked to make sure I hadn't missed Vanessa's call. Then I got the code Detective Marshall had given me and called her. I was so irritated when she responded that I found it difficult to express what I was thinking. Hey, you ought to speak with David Stevens of the Stevens Agency. He appears to be connected to my wife and may know anything about her disappearance. She drew a long breath. You're simply returning to your job and letting the cops handle it? I writhed in my chair. Well, no, but I've been suspicious of that person for a long time. In any case, I wanted to know if Vanessa had shown up for work this morning. So the boss of your wife admitted to having a love relationship with your wife? He was mocking me for it, albeit not precisely. In any case, I can support it with proof. I then told her the fascinating story of how I found my wife's knickers concealed in Stephen's couch. Additionally, are the pants items with you? No, I think they're still there, but Stevens took them away. I saw her take a big breath. All right, Mr. Duncan. I require your undivided attention and rigorous obedience to my commands. Yes, I'm willing to try anything. I want you to go straight to your workplace and do your normal work without doing any investigative work. Does that make sense? However, what about Stevens? We shall talk to the others and to him, you said. But the more you interfere, the more likely it is that you will cause more harm than good. Are you understanding what I'm saying now? I sighed. Yes, I do understand, instructor. I'll act appropriately. My speech caused her to resound with laughter. Well done, youngster, she said. Now behave yourself, and hung up. I was eager to tell Jimmy about what had happened as soon as I got to the workplace. I could not hide the look on Stephen's face when I told him about my conversation with him. Thank goodness you were there instead of me. I would have responded violently if he had tried to act in such a way towards me. Yes, but I've enraged Detective Marshall enough already. It is difficult to foresee your possible response. If I had physically challenged Stevens during the day, I tried to concentrate on my work, but it was really difficult. My blood would always boil whenever I thought of Stevens and his sly hints regarding Vanessa. My fury would then grow as my thoughts would shift to Vanessa. Being easily distracted made it hard for me to concentrate on the task at hand. So in an effort to catch up, I ended up working late. Later, I made the decision to stop for supper at a fast food restaurant on my way home. If Vanessa showed up, I didn't want to take the chance of missing her, but she didn't. I spent another sleepless night tossing and turning, which suggests that the oily meal didn't sit well with my stomach. After falling asleep for a while, I would wake up and move around. Every time I did, I remembered the subject of my dream. This time, Vanessa and Stevens took over my fantasies. Sometimes they would make fun of me, and other times they would hug and make fun of me. I excitedly leaped out of bed when my alarm clock sounded at 6 in the morning, and Detective Marshall suddenly showed there to begin lecturing me. I had barely completed my breakfast when the doorbell rang. After recognizing Vanessa, I rushed to the door. Nevertheless, I was somewhat aback to see Detective Marshall standing there looking grave. I opened it. I hate to tell you, Mr. Duncan, Mickey, that we could have found your wife's body. I stepped back, my voice catching in my throat. I had always thought about it, but my resentment of Vanessa kept me from seeing a situation in which we might work things out. What took place? She had a mysterious look on her face. Let S take a seat. I dutifully followed her as she walked by me into the living room. The mask came off as we sat down, exposing a profound sense of empathy. I hate to notify you that it appears she was sexually assaulted and then suffocated. The ringmaster, I cried out in shock. That's how it seems. Her rings are missing, and the technique of procedure was similar. A shiver went down my back. As I struggled with the horrific incident and my own sad thoughts about Vanessa, I was overcome with emotions. Where had she gone? I asked. The corpse was discovered by us in Burnham Woods. A chill went through my body. During my childhood, I had spent many hours exploring those forests, getting to know every inch of them. I looked to the floor, trying to hide from Marshall any signs of discomfort. Mickey, she cut me off in my tracks. I apologize for disturbing you, but in order to identify the deceased, you must come down to the mortuary. I looked up. Okay, so you're implying that it may be someone else instead of her? She held out her hand for mine. Avoid being overly enthused. Regretfully, this is a standard practice. I had run out of things to say. I didn't hesitate to accept her offer of a ride. I was seriously doubting that I could drive at the time. This was the first time I had ever entered a mortuary. The location has the distinct look and smell of a hospital. The idea that no one recovers and returns home struck me as disturbing. We went into the refrigerator area. Among many others, Nora carefully read the list before carefully opening a square door. Within the wall, it's like gently pulling open a vault. Carefully, she opened the robust black plastic bag and held out the sliding table. She raised the flap. I forced myself to look in its direction. It was her. When was the last time I saw Vanessa? There had been contempt on her face, reminiscent of her beauty. Her face seemed serene. Her face, lips, and cheeks were all sickly white on our wedding day, looking like melted wax. I looked away, not wanting to remember her like that in the waiting room. I was taken aback by the detective's sudden request. "I have another assignment for you to finish while we're here. I need you to give me a DNA swab." "What?" "I have no idea why. It's only a step in the process. During the autopsy, we need your DNA to rule out any possibilities. In the event that we find any evidence, especially within her, that may be connected to you." "Okay, I guess it will help identify who is responsible for this." She quickly applied the swab to the inside of my cheek, and before long, I was traveling back to my residence. The landscape seemed completely unremarkable, with no known features. I turned to face her. "I guess it's time for me to start planning the funeral." An expression of sadness appeared on her face. "The body may not be released for a while. It must be autopsied and kept as evidence by the authorities. When it's ready, they will let you know." As she left me off at home, I was speechless. She took care to look him in the eye. "We're committed to finding the culprit behind this. Mickey. Justice will not elude them." I just gave a nod. Once she was gone, I called Jimmy to let him know what had happened. "Whoa, what a surprise. This is unbelievable, Mickey. It's like a bad dream. Remain where you are and listen. I'll be straight over to join you." "No, Jimmy, don't do it. It is imperative that you get in touch with everyone who needs to know and break the bad news. I don't feel like I can do this assignment right now. Someone also has to make sure the business runs smoothly. Please let me be alone for a while." He resisted at first, but I was able to convince him to comply with my request. He terminated the call, and I knew I needed to call someone Jimmy wouldn't know about. I braced myself for an emotional reaction as I broke the heartbreaking news to Frankie. Her ability to hold her breath enthralled me and left me wondering what would happen next. Just when I was starting to worry about her health, she suddenly said, "Oh, Mickey, she will be sorely missed." After that, she asked how I was feeling. I told her that I appreciated her concern and promised to stay in touch. When the call was over, I couldn't resist shaking my head. Although I've always recognized Frankie's individuality, I was surprised by her reaction. Well, everyone handles loss in a different manner. Speaking of processing, I made the decision to examine my feelings. When the shock began to wear off, what was replacing it? Not a tear has fallen from my eye. As I looked more closely at my feelings, I found that I still harbored wrath. It makes sense that you're upset. After all, your wife was slain after being viciously attacked. And the narrative doesn't stop there. I went back to our bedroom and looked at Vanessa's wardrobe, which was filled to overflowing with her vast collection. I had a startling realization. Vanessa continues to enrage me. Maybe I stole. The reason for my annoyance is her inadvertent desertion. My rage at her treatment of me only intensified as I gave the matter more thought. Contempt was contempt, and she probably would still treat me that way if she were still here. I could sense the intensity rising within of me, indicating that I had discovered something really significant. My feelings had not changed with her death. I couldn't stop thinking about her dead body. Unable to complete the mission, I was left in the middle of the forest, trying to arouse some sympathy. I will only need to exercise patience. Maybe in time, my viewpoint will shift. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I walked about the home looking for little things to do to pass the time. I noticed a few things on the bookshelf that Vanessa had purchased, little trinkets that she thought were cute but that I didn't like. I threw them in the garbage. I once went over to my computer to check my email, but I was forced to shut it off right away. When a barrage of questions and empathetic texts flooded in, "I can't deal with it right now." I turned off the outdoor lights and carefully closed all the drapes as the sun started to drop. I had previously heard that it was a blatant sign that the family didn't want guests and wanted to be left alone. I felt quite strongly that I didn't want them, not then and maybe not later. That night, as I got ready for bed, I felt a wave of unease as I walked into the bedroom, knowing full well that Vanessa would never be there again. I was so shocked that I had to shake my head. Mickey, you approach things in a really unusual manner. Strangely, I slept soundly through the night without having any disturbing dreams. Maybe you still can't believe it. After waking up, I drank coffee and cereal for breakfast. I was then left wondering what I should do next. Is going into the workplace required of me? Shall I start answering all those emails? Would I be better off staying hidden for the day? Yesterday, I gave in to my curiosity and switched my phone back on. I didn't want to talk to anyone, yet my voicemail box was full of messages, as I had expected. I quickly looked at the caller list and was taken aback when my phone started ringing. I thought maybe there should be more condolences, but before I could end the phone, I saw it was Detective Marshall. I ought to answer. Her voice reverberated in my ear. Mickey, I simply had to tell you right now. The ringmaster was captured. What? You're not telling the truth. What took place? In one instance, a person tried to kidnap another woman, but luckily, a watchful onlooker saw what was happening and called the police right away. We were able to capture the offender before any damage could be done because of their prompt response. She lowered her voice in anticipation. I know you may not be very comforted by Vanessa's passing, but at least we can make sure that justice is done. No worries, that's okay. The fact that you caught him is simply incredible. Although I wish it had happened sooner, the fact that he will face justice is what matters most. Fortunately, he will not have the chance to hurt anybody else. I paused for a moment. What comes next then? He's being questioned right now, and I've been told that he's making a full confession. This will probably be in the news shortly, but if you have any particular queries, don't be afraid to ask. Thank you for calling, Nora. All right, Although I'm still trying to process all that has transpired, your viewpoint definitely helps to clarify things. The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster. One side was the intense sadness of coping with Vanessa's passing. However, there was also satisfaction in knowing that the person who had harmed her and several others had been apprehended. But the peace that followed the mayhem didn't last long. I heard someone knock on my office door while I was working. I was about to get up when Nora came in via the open door. Her face was devoid of any hint of a grin. I hate to tell you, Mickey, that the ringmaster has denied any role in the grisly death of your wife. We have spoken about it in detail. I was surprised by her. There's no doubt that he is lying. He is obviously guilty. Her expression didn't change. He has confessed to every other murder. Mickey revealed information that we kept private, but when it comes to Vanessa's death, he maintains his innocence, and that's not all. We happened onto his collection of rings and located each one of them. But we were unable to find Vanessa's ring. Mickey, I'm struggling to get the idea. I have further news to share with you. Unfortunately, the results of the DNA test we performed on him did not match. We did, however, uncover a match, so there's more to the story. Who is yours? Mickey, your DNA was a perfect match. No, it's simply not feasible, I yelled, my mind racing with ideas. 2 weeks had passed since our previous romantic adventure. Her hands were behind her as she stood. Now she showed them the handcuffs she had been carrying and escorted them to the front. As she spoke, disappointment weighed heavily on her eyes. You are being arrested, Mickey Duncan, for strangling your wife, Vanessa Duncan. I was looking about wildly when I noticed the large policeman at my door. Mickey, let's keep this easy, she pleaded. I sighed in frustration and grudgingly held out my hands to her. That's when Jaime ran to the doorway. Mickey, what the hell is going on? Oh, he said. I need you to find me a lawyer, Jimmy, but I don't understand either. Okay. Nora took my arm and led me away with ease, and he nodded slightly, as soon as I was scheduled, to the fingerprints and photos. It all seemed to happen so quickly. I was sitting in a holding cell before I realized it, utterly startled and incredulous at what was taking place. Is this a real thing, or simply another nightmare? Eventually, I heard footsteps approaching. Nora Marshall was standing just outside my cell as I looked up. She folded her arms across her chest fiercely. Nora, I pleaded, I promise I didn't. She looked at me sadly. then turned her back and walked away without saying anything. The official who had taken me to the holding cell eventually showed up at the door. You have a guest, Duncan. He spoke suddenly. Then Jimmy showed up. Mickey, the issue is beyond my comprehension. It seems like a terrible mistake. Have you been successful in finding me a lawyer? Yes. The company that manages our corporate work recommended me. Maxwell is his name. According to them, he has a great deal of expertise and has defended a variety of people in comparable situations. I brushed the uneasiness aside. The only thing I'm worried about is if he can help me get out of here long enough to solve the riddles that surround me. The weeks that followed were mind-blowing. Sometimes the hours seemed to go on forever, while other times the seconds passed so quickly. I was hauled before a judge after being indicted by a grand jury, and I steadfastly entered a not guilty plea. I felt my sanity gradually eroding throughout my stay in the municipal jail as I tried to comprehend the confusing sequence of events that had happened to me. Even though he was knowledgeable about the criminal court system, my lawyer, Max Maxwell, didn't seem very hopeful. He kept urging me to talk to the district attorney about a plea deal. We went to my bail hearing because I refused to back down. I secretly hoped that if I could only get out of that stifling cage, I would be able to learn the truth about the setup and the culprit. The who stressed the seriousness of my offense and voiced fears about me escaping Maxwell, was determined to keep me in detention. My lawyer emphasized my impeccable record and strong ties to the city. The judge ultimately struck a compromise and ordered bail at an astounding $1 million. I leaned in, feeling overwhelmed, and said Maxwell in a low voice, "How in the world am I going to come up with that kind of money?" This had really engaging storytelling in my opinion. I was interested in the story from start to finish because of the way it developed. With their own storytelling style, the author has a talent for holding the reader's attention. All in all, I thought the story's presentation was excellent. All that is required of you is 10% of $100,000. You can choose to start your own company for it. Jimmy gave me the chance to speak with him after the hearing. He said he was worried about the company, admitting it was partly my dot. He inquired as to whether I thought we could achieve our objectives, and I thought the narrative in this was really engaging. I was interested and curious about the story's development. The author's well-developed characters and intriguing story twists have a way of holding the reader's attention. All in all, I had a great time reading it. He answered with confidence and without hesitation. No issue, buddy. I am aware that you cannot travel to Mexico without me. Furthermore, you can be certain that I will pursue you if you dare to do that, he remarked with a playful wink. That afternoon, I was sitting at my home, free on bail, thinking about Vanessa's unexplained murder and its possible causes. Max Maxwell had promised to look at the evidence against me in detail, but I didn't think it would help me in any way. I couldn't resist making assumptions about David Stevens' possible role in the incident. I couldn't deny the possibility that he and Vanessa were having an affair. I started thinking about several possibilities. What if Vanessa started putting expectations on Stevens because she was too emotionally invested? Would he have gone to such drastic lengths as murder to get free from her control? Or what if Vanessa started using blackmail against him? The pressure on him would have undoubtedly increased as a result. Does anybody else? Thinking back to the night Vanessa vanished, I couldn't resist thinking about what may be. Nancy had talked about leaving Vanessa behind after hooking up with a guy, dancing at a club and vomiting, but I couldn't help but worry whether the narrative was not over yet. What if Nancy and the other person had chosen differently, and the result had been unanticipated and regrettable? Maybe, but it seemed so implausible to me. Speaking of unconventional thinking, perhaps I should look at even more unusual options. There was one person I knew who seemed obsessed with Vanessa, Frankie. Would Frankie have met Vanessa that night and tried to persuade her to leave me? Was Frankie rejected after expressing love interest for Vanessa? It is important to remember that Frankie was strong enough to hurt Vanessa if she wanted to. Could Frankie be the one responsible? However, that is impossible. Vanessa was sexually assaulted. I take it that the perpetrator was a man? Whatever crazy ideas I could think up, they always came full circle to the disturbing fact that the coroner found me in Vanessa. Although it was tempting to ignore the facts, I couldn't help but question whether I was to blame for her passing. Could I have done the thing and just suppressed the memory? As I thought back on that evening, memories started to come flooding back. Recollections that made me uneasy. There was no denying that I had been drinking too much that Friday, to the point of blacking out. But I kept asking myself whether I had woken up in the middle of the night and done something so horrible that I had unconsciously decided to forget it. What baffled me was how I could have committed such evil and then gone on to do ordinary garden labor. Saturday. Could I have been a heartless person? That brings to mind why, when I went out to mow the grass, my work boots were completely dirty. After doing my tasks, I generally make sure to tidy up. What if I had been furious that evening when Vanessa had arrived home? The possibility of what may have occurred is unnerving. I felt sick at the prospect. Then I remembered my nightmares, the horrible rage I felt for Vanessa, and the eerie images of desolate woodlands. But were those just my reactions to Vanessa's absence in the middle of the night? Desperate to find an explanation, I wondered. I needed to shift my perspective. I told myself it was important to go out of my house and get away from all of Vanessa's memories. I glanced at the wall clock and saw that it was nearly 5 o'clock already. As soon as possible, I made the decision to phone Jamie. Hey buddy, how about we get together at Louie's? I would really appreciate any help in comprehending the current circumstances. He had a drink waiting for me when he found us a booth in the rear. When I got there, he gave me the most recent company news while we drank our first round. Then, after a second round, he encouraged me to express my views and ideas. I told him that I had been thinking about Vanessa's inexplicable absence and all the reasons why. I talked about my wild thoughts and fantastical possibilities, but none of them explained why my DNA was the only one found at the site. Jamie made an effort to offer some support. That's what I've been thinking, Mickey. The lab technicians could have made a mistake. They could have found some evidence of your earlier run-in with Vanessa. They probably found it by accident and didn't bother to look any farther. Jamie, I'm not sure. That seems highly unlikely, and I'm not sure how I could support that assertion. In any case, the room briefly whirled when I shook my head. How many beers have I had? Oh my, I've only had 2. As of right now, I can't remember. Jimmy gave me a worried look as I massaged my eyes. Mickey, are you okay? This had really engaging storytelling in my opinion. I was interested and curious about the story's development. It was a very delightful experience. Yes, indeed. I'm all right. The beer seems to be catching up with me. I can't help it. Maybe it's because I stayed thirsty the whole time I was incarcerated. My mobile phone began to ring at that very time, and when I looked at the screen, I saw it was Max Maxwell. I have to respond to this, Jimmy. It's my attorney. I said. I stood up and stumbled a little as I walked out the back door in search of a more lucid soundscape. To get my equilibrium back, I sought support against the wall. What's going on, Max? This had really engaging storytelling, in my opinion. I was interested and curious about the story's development. The author has a talent for developing tension and compelling characters. All in all, I thought it was a really interesting read. He hesitated for a moment, and I wondered if I was slurring my words. I quote, V found some interesting facts, Mickey, that could help us make our case. Do you recall the police's DNA test? This had really engaging storytelling, in my opinion. I was interested and curious about the story's development. It was a very delightful experience. How was I ever going to forget it? This had really engaging storytelling, in my opinion. I was interested and curious about the story's development. The author is competent at holding the reader's attention till the very end. All in all, I thought the narrative was fantastic and would strongly suggest it to others. Guess what, though? Since that's often all they need to identify a match, they just examine a small portion of the DNA. They treated Vanessa that way. That was enough because the DNA in the traces matched yours. The alley appeared to wobble under me and I had trouble staying upright. Frantically, I tried to stabilize myself by pressing my back against the wall. Okay, Max, but how can I gain from this? This had really engaging storytelling, in my opinion. I was interested and curious about the story's development. It was an interesting and delightful experience. What would happen if the murderer had DNA that was very similar to yours? This had really engaging storytelling, in my opinion. I was interested in the story from start to finish because of the way it developed. It was a very delightful experience. I felt totally overpowered. Are you implying that there is another me out there? A malevolent doppelganger, perhaps? The narrative in this was really engaging, in my opinion. I was interested in the story the entire time because of how it developed. It was a very delightful experience. Have you had any alcohol, Mickey? This is no funny issue, I assure you. Listen carefully to what I have to say. I made an effort to think, but it was unsuccessful. Jimmy appeared when the door abruptly opened. My buddy, you're there! He laughed. Let me help you out. With a quick movement. After wrapping my arm around his shoulder and releasing my mobile phone, I lost consciousness. My head throbbed unrelentingly, and I gasped in agony as a bitter, disagreeable taste stayed in my lips. I tried to raise my head, but I stumbled and hit the tree just behind me. The narrative in this was really engaging, in my opinion. I was interested in the story from beginning to end because of the way it developed. The narrative took surprising turns and the characters were well developed. It was a fun experience all around. Oh, Jimmy said. It appears that the effects of the drug I give you are wearing off sooner than anticipated. I chose to be extra cautious this time because I was so concerned the prior time and thought I had hurt you. He shrugged casually. Honestly, I would have rather you had stayed in bed, but I guess there's nothing we can do about it. I cleared it with a shake of my head and tried to get up. Just then I saw that I was seated on the ground, securely fastened to the tree behind me. Hey Jimmy, what's going on? Help me figure out how to get freedom. My pal, I disagree. It took a lot of work on my part to get you here. I'm not quite sure. Would you kindly clarify the situation? This had really engaging storytelling, in my opinion. I was interested in the story from start to finish because of the way it developed. The narrative took a number of surprising turns, and the characters were well developed. All in all, it was a really delightful experience. With a pleased look on his face, he came over to tell me what had happened. I'll tell you what's happening. You choose to go into the woods where the event occurred because you felt bad about what you did to Vanessa. You quote, obviously dealing with a difficult circumstance. And it appears like you're trying to find a solution. He raised an automatic in his gloved hand and stated, You're going to take this gun and give it your all. There is nothing more simple than that. What I was hearing was unbelievable. You are the one who assassinated Vanessa, I cried out. I fixed him with my gaze. Because the narrative in this was really engaging for me. I was interested and curious about the story's development. It was amazing how well the author was able to develop compelling characters and tension. All in all, it was an excellent book that I heartily endorse. He laughed. For a long time, I had wanted a taste of your wife's extraordinary beauty. My companion. I had been seeing her regular appearances at that club, and I was struck by how engaging she looked when dancing. I already knew where they were when you came to me on Friday to complain about her choice to spend time with her cheating pal Nancy. Following that, it was rather simple to sedate Eva, drive you home, put on your work boots, and take your car to Singles and Doubles. Nancy was leaving with someone when I got there, which gave me the chance to confront your wife, warn her of the repercussions of her adultery, and persuade her to accompany me. With only one little touch, she slipped into a deep sleep. After I got her out in the woods, I realized that if she was willing to divulge her secret, there was no reason why I shouldn't have a role in the fun. Man, you ought to have noticed the cheetah's pants. She was undoubtedly anticipating a good time. I decided to help myself, and the story was really captivating. I have to admit. She woke up abruptly, though, and started screaming, which I couldn't stand, so I permanently silenced her. A feeling of astonishment and dismay washed over me. His face lit up with a broad smile. To tell the truth, I suspected that was how it would be from the beginning. For that reason, I set everything up so that you would be held accountable. It seems like I performed fairly well as well, but you helped me. In order to raise bail, you consented to post the plant. Why not? I wished for everyone to see how devoted I was to my sibling. In addition, I sensed you were staying put. As he related his story, I was terrified and engrossed in the gripping story that was being told to me. My mind was always racing to come up with a solution to the problem we were facing. Let's collaborate to lift these constraints and come up with a strategy. Jimmy. Suicide, is not likely to convince anyone. It's unbelievable that I'm unable to escape this situation. No, you can't, he laughed. I'd be glad to do that for you, though. Jimmy, no. Everyone will comprehend what happened with ease. I've taken care of that. After I've taken care of you, I'll take off the cuffs and make sure your body shows no telling indications of foul play. I quote, L. Then put the gun in your grasp and fire another bullet off in the distance. They'll find you with the pistol in your hand and gunpowder residue on your fingers. It doesn't seem plausible that anybody would challenge your decision to leave no message, especially with the wealth of evidence. He became grim-faced. I'm done talking, dude. The moment to end this is almost here. Wait a moment, Jimmy. Would you mind giving me an explanation? What use does it serve to ask? I have always been the younger sister, always in the background and viewed as less significant throughout my whole life. Dad loved you the most. It was me who failed to live up to his standards. I was on the second team and you were the outstanding quarterback. While I had to settle for technical school, you earned your MBA. He was pacing back in front of me now, his annoyance intensifying quickly. After Dad gave us the business, it seems like things have only gotten worse. I had thought that life after school would offer some improvement. Mr. I hold an MBA and served as president when I was employed at the factory. Congratulations, Jimmy. You have been elevated to the role of operations vice president. This had really engaging storytelling in my opinion. I was interested and curious about the story's development. The narrative took surprising turns, and the characters were well developed. All in all, it was a really delightful experience. Keep silent, he shouted. It wasn't me, and everyone knows who is in control. Then his tone became low and disagreeable. Additionally, you always had a choice when it came to ladies. Who did you ultimately wed? She is the school's most popular girl. During the holidays, when you would invite her over, I used to dream about her before bed. Why couldn't I have someone who could tell stories so compellingly? Why did you have to take center stage? All the praise. This had really engaging storytelling in my opinion. It captivated me and held my attention the entire time. The story's development was really captivating. The way the narrative was delivered was excellent. I really like reading it. As though to refute a troublesome idea, he shook his head. But everything will be different tonight, my friend. People will remember you. Don't worry, you won't be forgotten. They will recall you as the one who, after learning of adultery, perpetrated a horrible act on their spouse. When they think about you, they will feel conflicted, and I will be the only one who keeps the truth. Jimmy, you're not alone. Take note. Police force, drop your weapon now, please. This had really engaging storytelling in my opinion. I was interested and curious about the story's development. The author has a talent for developing tension and compelling characters. All in all, I thought it was a really interesting read. Nora Marshall surprised us both by coming out from behind a big maple tree, holding her Glock in both hands and pointing it straight at Jimmy's chest. The tone of Jimmy's speech changed so drastically that I was absolutely taken aback. No, investigator. Everything has been misinterpreted by you. I followed Mickey out here and found out that he was the one responsible. He came with the goal of getting rid of some evidence that may be used against him. I only had the opportunity to phone you when I caught him. Calmly, she answered. She then turned her focus to her right. Could you verify if your body cam speech recorder was operational, Patrolman Jenkins? This had really engaging storytelling in my opinion. I was interested and curious about the story's development. The author has a talent for developing tension and compelling characters. It was a fun read all around. From behind a tall old tree, a police officer in uniform appeared. Indeed, ma'am, every word of that made sense to me. The detective turned back to us. You're being taken into custody on rape and murder charges, Jimmy Duncan. Please put your hands behind your head and lower the gun. All right, you prevail, Jimmy said, raising his hands in surrender. In a startling turn of events, however, he charged at me, sank to one knee, and shot the patrolman. The cop dropped to the ground, and I quickly responded by bending my knees and trying to hit him in the hip with both feet. He lost his equilibrium and fell to the floor. He was furious, so he got up fast and pointed the rifle at me. But one shot rang out across the air before he could draw the trigger. He stumbled to the side when it hit him in the back. After groaning in anguish, he briefly convulsed before lying still. Nora hurried over with her revolver, keeping her eyes on Jimmy the whole while. When she got to him, she pushed her foot into his back. She placed her foot on his pistol hand and secured the weapon to the ground when he did not move. Even though he didn't answer, she bent down and carefully took it from him. Then she came over to me. "Are you okay?" Her voice was full of enthusiasm as she inquired. "That is what I think it is," she cautioned me and handed me Jimmy's revolver. Don't forget to watch him. "I'll go help Jenkins." I watched as the blood slowly dripped from Jimmy's still body as she vanished into the darkness. I heard a gasp from the trees and looked up to see Nora helping Jenkins as they approached me. "Oh no, I feel as though a mule has kicked me." He let out a moan. She smiled, not with laughter but with relief. "What would have happened if you hadn't been wearing your vest?" She frantically punched in a help request on her phone. She came over and began untying the straps that bound me to the tree after checking that assistance was on its way. To be honest, I didn't think he would fight. Her hand was shaking, and I could feel it. "You kicked him as a hasty reaction. I didn't have time to consider, I simply responded. Then it hit me. Where did you find us in this location?" The narrative in this was really engaging, in my opinion. I was interested in the story from beginning to end because of the way it developed. It was a very delightful experience. She grinned broadly. "Ever since you were freed on bond, I have been watching you very carefully." "Oh, so you really thought I was the culprit?" The grin got bigger. "No, I was quite sure you were innocent. I have known people in the past who have done horrible things to their wives. Furthermore, I have to admit that your actions did not like those of a normal criminal. I couldn't help but have residual suspicions even after the DNA match." "Hello," I gave myself a forehead smack. "You should speak with my attorney Max," I cried out. "He found that your DNA test has a problem." She apologized and shrugged a little. "I'm sorry about that. We never imagined that your brother would have almost the same DNA when the test result was positive." I turned to look at Jimmy's body lying on the floor, dead. I was shocked by how he was still only a passing notion in his last minutes. I was slowly getting closer to having the house seem the way I wanted it to. Packing up all of Vanessa's clothes and shoes had been a big undertaking, and I had to rent a vehicle to get everything to the charity store. The same was true of the numerous decorations and items she had amassed. Maybe they would mean more to someone else than to me. I had to go through a sizable collection of images. I wasn't too interested in preserving relics of the past, so it was a little overpowering. But that got me thinking about how I wanted to eliminate the EWC of my former existence. When I saw the photos with Vanessa in them, the problem became much more pressing. With all the shots of Jimmy and me, what should I do? I gave it a lot of thought before deciding to pack everything up and put it in the attic. My reasoning was that I could decide on them later. I was heading downstairs. My attention was drawn to the doorbell's abrupt ring. I was shocked to see Detective Marshall standing across from me as soon as I opened the door. "Come on in." She hesitantly sat down in my living room after I invited her. "Is everything okay?" I inquired. "Nothing is present." "Oh no," she cut in right away. "I didn't intend that at all. I just stopped by to bring these to you," she said nonchalantly as she handed her the wedding rings. She gave a headshake. "They were in Jimmy's pocket. He apparently got them from Vanessa in that specific event. In any case, it appears like he wanted to use those things against you as more proof of your guilt." She smiled a little as she spoke. "I wanted to return them to you since I thought you would be interested." "Thank you, Nora. You didn't have to put yourself through all that. To be honest, I'm not really sure what I want to do with these. Honestly, by going through Vanessa's possessions, I've been getting rid of things I didn't want to keep." "I see you understand." She gave a nod. Abruptly, she got up from her chair. "Well, I've kept you busy long enough," she remarked, "so I'll let you get back to work." Unsure of what to say at the time, I got up as well. She hesitated for only a second, then decided and opened her purse again. With a resolute step, she picked up a little rectangle of paper. "Here is my card with my number on it," she said as she handed it to me. "If you ever need to ask questions about anything at all, please feel free to call me," she said. She stared at me and then left the room quietly. A wave of bewilderment passed over me as I stood there. She had told me that everything was settled, and it appeared that she had already given me one of her cards. I watched through the glass, fascinated by her elegant gait as she walked to her vehicle. Her beauty was undeniable with a feeling of fulfillment. I took another look at the card I was holding. My lips are moving in a grin. I carefully placed your card in my wallet since I knew it was crucial to keep it safe. Do Story 3. When my ex's sister began dating my best friend during our senior year of high school, I first met her. She became pregnant, and they were married soon after. I joined the armed forces. I was medically discharged after 6 years of service. My ex and I began dating at that time. I got a good job that needed me to travel for up to 10 days at a time, a couple of times a month. She received a text from her sister on her phone as we were finishing up last-minute wedding preparations. It said, "Have you discussed your liaison with your ex with your boyfriend? I'll tell tomorrow if you don't tell tonight." "What's this about?" I inquired. She made an effort to ignore it. She eventually acknowledged that she had run into him at her bachelorette celebration, but she swore that nothing happened until I persisted in pressing her for the truth. It was blatantly false. I made the decision to look through her phone after she went to sleep. I discovered photos and texts with him from the beginning of our relationship. Every time I went on a business trip, they would hook up. I texted my phone the proof. I confronted her after waking her up, and we immediately broke up. I showed her one of the screenshots of her and her ex in my bed, despite her attempts to play the victim. "Stephanie looks a lot like your ex-boyfriend," I informed her. I gently escorted her out the door as she began to weep. In order to phone the guests and let them know that the wedding was canceled, I canceled all of the plans. According to my friend's wife, she had seen them sneaking off together and having sex at the bachelorette party. She approached them and offered my ex the option of confessing to me herself, or letting her do it herself. She was unaware that this was a continuous situation. Let's now discuss the honeymoon. To make everything ideal for my ex, I had carefully prepared it. She had always referred to the 10-day journey to a distant nation as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It was her ideal vacation, complete with opulent accommodations and incredible adventures. I would lose even more money if I canceled the honeymoon trip, because I had already spent around $10,000 on the wedding, given that they had never taken a honeymoon or any other kind of vacation since getting married young and starting a family. I thought it would be appropriate to offer them the trip. They just saved me a ton of money and trouble too. They gladly agreed. They were able to arrange for childcare for the children throughout the vacation and secure time off from work. My ex called and texted me nonstop after learning that she had lost it, calling me a variety of derogatory things for what I had done to her. She insisted that the trip was her ideal getaway before I destroyed her life. Her friends and some family members she had lied to sent me texts, accusing me of being the reason behind the split. Her ex even threatened me via text after labeling me a less manly person. He shouldn't have had my number, therefore he must have been with her the night before. I haven't replied to any of them, but I'm left wondering, am I to blame for allowing my cheating ex-fiancé to take her sister and my best friend on his ideal honeymoon? The amusing thing about me is that, even in a conflict zone, I can remain calm as a cucumber. But I was a complete mess that night. I was unable to think clearly. When you get a ton of messages from individuals you believed were interested in you, it truly takes you by surprise. Positively, my employment requires me to get regular checks, which includes blood tests. Fortunately, everything came up negative when I went to get particularly tested for any sexually transmitted illnesses after all of this. Because of his threats, I followed some of your suggestions and obtained a restraining order against the other man. Having positive relationships with local police enforcement is beneficial. You guys were correct, I tell you. The truth was revealed without me having to do anything. The evening following her discovery of the honeymoon, she arrived at her sister's house, knocked on the door, and demanded all the information about the trip. She went crazy when she was turned down. She screamed and yelled before being taken into custody. When the police were summoned by the neighbors, the icing on the cake, during her outburst, she acknowledged that she had slept around behind my back, that she had never loved me, and that she was only using me. All of it was captured on camera. Did I mention that? Thank you. Doorbell camera. It was posted. Her relatives began to apologize to me, but her friends didn't say anything. I thus emailed them a PG-rated photo and screenshots of the messages. She also disparaged the majority of them in the texts. The other person then arrived at my place and made an attempt to chat to me and break in. He was intoxicated. I gently controlled him and taught him a valuable lesson in self-defense. When the police arrived, he was taken into custody. I have audio-equipped cameras as well. He might face charges of assault, attempted break-in, and restraining order violation. So the majority of her family has passed away. Her affair partner is going to jail, and friends spent a night in jail. I was able to secure a 1-month job that offers bonuses and the opportunity to go abroad. I'm hoping that this will help me decompress so that I'll be psychologically better when I go back. The second story, regarding my friend and his spouse. They departed for the vacation on Monday. I was able to modify some of the trip's more private information to their names. I also made arrangements for the hotel to set up an inexpensive camera and a sign that read, "Remember to record the journey and create lasting memories." The second story. Okay, people, get ready for a story that will be as sensational as a sizzling steak on a hot griddle. Let me begin by stating that I tend to be a laid-back man. It has always been. However, my ex-wife saw our marriage in a different light. She didn't appear to consider it as a firm commitment, but more as a clear query. I tell you, it's quite the character. It all started when I learned that my beloved husband was having an affair with a member of our exclusive country club. Is it not unbelievable? We spent many Sundays playing golf and enduring those endless breakfasts at our own damn country club. Can you guess who it was? The husband of that annoying couple, Frank and Darla, was none other than Frank. Isn't it quite the soap opera? How did I find out this secret then? Well, it wasn't a sudden flash of superhuman insight or some cunning private investigator. Her own incapacity was the sole cause. In an attempt to hide her identity, she had stupidly saved intimate pictures and romantic emails in a hidden email account on her phone. She thought of herself as the Mata Hari of the current day. She was mistaken, though. She played the innocent card when I approached her, denying everything until I put my cards down. The pictures, the emails. It was similar to seeing a delicate porcelain doll break apart. She pleaded for my pardon as her entire facade fell apart. What a show! Oscar-worthy. However, I was not purchasing any tickets for that performance. I told her that she wasn't truly sorry for what she had done. She was only sorry that she had been discovered. She became as pale as a sheep's face. She inquired about my plans. I answered in a contented quiet. It was similar to being in combat and not letting the enemy know your tactics, isn't it? I saw it precisely like that. I had proclaimed a week-long quiet war. She was a nervous wreck, fumbling over her words and making more blunders than a novice juggling. While I pretended everything was okay. Behind the scenes, I kept my composure and implemented my strategy. I started the divorce filing procedure and had my attorney handle the required paperwork. This small bit of knowledge was something I hadn't yet told her. After keeping my cards close to the vest, the ideal moment arrived. The country club's quarterly dinner. The club president, Frank, was constantly accompanied by his obnoxious wife, Darla. I offered to speak during the occasion. When I told my wife, I could almost hear her heart thumping in her chest. Observing a deer in headlights was like that. Her eyes were filled with fear. When the day finally came, we were seated among the town's elite, decked up to the nines. I saw my wife's knuckles whiten as I got up to go on stage, gripping the tablecloth like it was her lifeline. I started off by talking about how important it is to take charge of one's life and not let uncontrollable events define or mold who we are. The most ironic part of my speech was when I handed out envelopes to each person in the room, telling them to wait for my signal before opening them. You could almost cut the air with a knife because of how tense it was. Everybody's gaze flickered nervously between me and the envelopes. My wife had a look on her face like she had just met a ghost. She gripped her unopened mail firmly, beads of perspiration running down her forehead. As my speech was coming to an end, at last I issued the order. As the country club members ripped open their envelopes, the room fell into a quiet calm before anarchy broke out. The packages had the same photos and emails I had found, making Frank's treachery public knowledge. Poor Darla was left in shock after seeing her husband betray him, and my wife's dishonesty was exposed. Under the intense glare, every skeleton that had been hidden in the closet was now dancing. Frank's face became a sickening green, as though he had just eaten an insect. Darla, for her part, gazed at the pictures as though they were an item from another planet. my wife's face turning from pale to scorching crimson. She was at the center of the storm, actually. Her eyes were wide with dread. You can imagine how hectic the aftermath was. The club's once loved president, Frank, quickly lost his position. Quicker than a race vehicle. In one evening, he changed from being the town's top dog to its largest pariah, zooming down a straightaway. Darla was distraught. The revelation that her husband had been deceiving her hit her like a ton of bricks, causing her to sob loudly across the hallway. Let quote S now discuss my wife. She has a lot of interpersonal abilities, in her circles all the time. But in an instant, everything collapsed. It resembled watching the overthrow of a monarch. Her reputation as the home spread like wildfire around our community as a result of the story. Her expression showed the embarrassment and shame. And I must say that I felt a great deal of enjoyment from that. All right, let's be truthful. I took great pleasure in it. However, my announcement of my departure from the club was the cherry on top. Is it possible? I was one of the long-standing members they were losing, in addition to their president. There was a profound quiet in the room. You could hear a pin drop in the silence. With a mixture of amazement, betrayal, and desperation, my wife gazed at me. However, I had severed all connections with both her and the club. I moved to a new place, packed up my life, and brought my internet business with me. It was a new beginning. My wife was left to deal with the fallout from her decisions, leaving behind all the drama, deception, and heartbreak. Let's just say that Frank had his own struggles to contend with. In my case, I was at last emancipated from a poisonous relationship in a stuffy town. You might argue that my retaliation was ultimately fulfilling as well, like savoring a freshly baked, warm chocolate souffle. Regaining control over your life and advocating for yourself has a certain sense of fulfillment. I felt powerful and in control again at that instant, even if some would consider it petty or cruel. No regrets, just important lessons learned in an infinitely promising future. Let's now review the events of the past year. It's time to hear about everyone's life. First, let's talk about what happened following my small surprise at the country club. The divorce process proceeded more smoothly than expected, which surprised me. Fortunately, I kept complete control of my internet business as I had already built it up before I met my wife. She was left with only a monthly maintenance payment, which was more than reasonable because of my business's success. We'll refer to it as the cost of seeking love. Regarding my ex-wife, her efforts to obtain a job in a location where her image was damaged didn't work out. Being known as the townhouse wrecker isn't exactly a desirable trait for prospective employers. It appears she finally decided to go elsewhere, maybe in pursuit of better opportunities with less severe criticism. Frank, too. He got the short end of the stick, oh boy. He lost a large amount of his business to dog as a result of his unfavorable divorce. It just proves that the adage is accurate. No one is more angry than a woman who is scorned. Frank had to completely rebuild everything from the ground up. It's amazing how the sequence and timing of events may drastically change your life's course. Let's get to the more entertaining portion of this revision now, shall we? Compared to my ex-wife, this wonderful woman I've started seeing is a welcome change in my life. But let me tell you, I'm not thinking about getting married. Milk, I've been there and done that. I got the memento. I'm now more than happy dating, expanding my business, and enjoying life's little pleasures. Actually, my love for playing the piano has been rekindled, something I'd put aside while I was married. When you're not constantly navigating the matrimonial minefield, you can do amazing things. Right now, I want to start a band that plays throwback wave music from the 1980s just for fun. Who knows? Perhaps one day I'll even post some of our music here. Well, people, there you have it. Although my life has completely changed, I have come out of it a better, happier person with a fresh lease on life. The third story. Never forget that you may always take back control and live your life as you see fit. Fortunately, Frank was able to get away with less harm than most others. How do you all feel? Although the outcome of that retaliation was quite satisfying, do you have any suggestions for how it may have had even greater effect? I suppose I'm not really sure what I want to gain from this post. Perhaps I'm searching for someone who can understand why someone would cheat, and with a complete deadbeat at that, just 3 months before their wedding. In order to get the full thing off my chest, I figured this could be a good place. Let's go back 6 months. My fiancée had lost her job a few months before to our wedding, and I caught her in bed with my friend's brother only 3 months before our wedding. She has struggled to keep down a job ever since I've known her. She has never been able to maintain one for over a year. It was never her fault, and she either leaves or gets fired, or so she claimed. Because, well, I loved her. I always trusted her. You put up with a lot more of their crap and tend to give them the benefit of the doubt when you're in love. Since I owned my store, I ultimately offered her a part-time position. It didn't take me long to understand why she struggled to maintain employment. She never had the self-discipline to complete a task, was consistently late, and always had an excuse. She would rather interact and talk than work. But since I was in love with her, I ignored all of these shortcomings. My first love was her. My first love, my first kiss. Over the last 6 years, we've developed a great deal together. Although we did have some difficult times together, I sincerely thought she was the one I wanted to live out the rest of my days with. I still can't envision my life with anybody else. But I have no other option because of her. Our wedding shower was held 3 weeks prior to D-Day. Even though it was nerve-wracking, hectic, and everything, we had a terrific time. We were grateful to all of the friends and family that came to support us. It seemed much more genuine because it was the first function we had before our wedding in May. We frequently visited my closest friend's house around those times since his younger brother had just moved in with him. With him, my fiancé became friends. Let's now call this 21-year-old Brenda. Even though some people would be surprised that their spouse had a buddy of the opposing sex, I didn't think much of it because Brandon is the younger brother of my best friend. Brandon shared a 2-bedroom home with his brother. His brother had the additional space, so he was letting him crash there because he didn't have a job. Additionally, Brandon no longer wanted to live with their mother. Brandon is a socially awkward, introverted, and bashful individual. Whenever she spent time with my fiancé, she would constantly claim that she was only attempting to help him come out of his shell because he was such a social butterfly. I operate a shop and put in a lot of overtime, especially now that the wedding costs are approaching. The majority of those attending the wedding are from my fiancé's side. My fiancé's only source of income is the money I provide her for working with me part-time. Therefore, I am paying for all of the wedding-related costs. My fiancé was alone in charge of the preparation. A few months before to our wedding, my closest buddy and I occasionally swap or borrow equipment from one another because we are in the same industry, albeit on a lesser scale. My fiancé began taking time off from his job. She continually used the excuse that she was organizing our wedding. She would make any excuse, and our wedding was no exception. Since I didn't need her assistance most of the time, I disregarded her even though I knew it was nonsense until it became second nature. I had to pick up something from my friend's house one day. He had left one of my tools in his garage after borrowing it. Since I wanted a peek and he was overworked, I decided to stop by and get it myself. He informed me that Brandon was at home, but he didn't want me hammering on his door all day because he may be sleeping due to his unemployment. He then handed me his keys so I could enter his garage and get what I needed. Since I had no one to keep an eye on my store, I shuttered it before I went. My fiancée excused herself by saying she was meeting with our wedding planner. My friend's house was only a short drive away. I had to enter his garage through his front door and then through his car door since his garage door was broken. I heard groaning as I was making my way to the garage. It was unmistakably a female voice. I believed Brandon had scored, so I grinned. Because he was so reserved and quiet, I didn't think he could pull a lady. I never would have imagined that a lady would become my fiancé. After grabbing everything I needed, I made my way into the garage as quietly as possible to avoid creating any noise. I started to leave the home by going back to the front door, but I halted in the middle when I heard my fiancé's voice. It all made sense to me right away. After setting the tool down in the hallway, I cautiously approached the room where the noise was coming from. I was only a few steps away from the front door because the room was close to the hallway. Her shoes at the front entrance were another hint that it was my fiancé. I was near enough now to know that the lady groaning was my fiancé, and I was positive it was her. I tried to unlock the door by twisting the knob, but it was locked. I had to break the latch and push my way inside. My fiancé was attempting to hide behind Brant as soon as I pushed my way in. To defend themselves, Brandon was clutching a clothes hanger. Looking back, it's sort of humorous, but I didn't find it funny at the time. My fiancé emerged from behind him and began to apologize when they realized it was me who had just walked in. She initially claimed it was an intoxicated error. It was the first time it had occurred. She was aware that she had made a mistake, etc. When she leaves the store, I ask her if this is what she's been doing. Is this how she plans weddings? She lied when I inquired how long this had been going on, claiming that it was the first time I wanted to express my feelings to Brandon. However, the child is so frail and sickly that it's difficult to accept that he approached my fiancé. I assumed it had been started by her. I recall being quite hurt when I realized how hard I had worked over the previous few months to earn enough money to cover the wedding expenses. Furthermore, she was teasing another man. Knowing that all of my hard work has gone in vain is the worst feeling in the world. In Brandon's room, we were having a disagreement when he disappeared. I understood that she was lying through her teeth, therefore there was no need in talking to her. Despite the fact that she had been exposed. I grew more irate the more she lied, and it began to have a bodily impact on me. My knees felt like they were going to give out. I rushed out of my friend's house to seek some fresh air after I began to hyperventilate. I called my friend and told him what I had just learned. I inquired as to how long he had been aware of this. I was as astonished as he was, and he vowed to protect his daughter. I didn't know what to do next. I went to the pub to get a drink and decompress, since I didn't feel like going back to work that day. I was too preoccupied to respond when my friend tried to contact me. I felt foolish for not having any suspicions. I felt foolish for attempting to wed someone I believed to be a friend. I believed that 6 years was enough time after we had been together. I was oblivious to her genuine nature because of my love for her. She might be pushy and self-centered. In front of our friends, she would occasionally make fun of me. However, I was so enamored with her that I failed to see these shortcomings. Every one of her flaws became apparent. Before I discovered she was cheating, I was completely unaware of these things. They were as obvious as day now. I had deceived myself into believing that she was changing jobs because she was being courted by her supervisors, who threatened to terminate her if she refused. Since I was in love with her, I believed every single one of the numerous justifications she gave me. In the days that followed, she made an effort to persuade me that she would never speak to him again, and that we didn't need to postpone the wedding. She said that she wanted to be with me and that she did this because I wasn't providing her with the attention and praise she so desperately needed. After that, I was always working. Someone needs to work around here, I informed her. Since Brandon is unemployed, he was always accessible while I worked for us to arrange a wedding. This romance seems to have been going on for a long time, in my opinion. I've tried to ignore it since I always assumed they were simply best friends. But she says I walked in on the first time. They've been hanging out a lot recently. I once informed her that I wanted her to leave my house and that we had to split ways. Her entire attitude shifted. Then it was. I've had some time away from this house now. This isn't what I want, I realized. And by keeping it from you, I've been a coward. It's been a long time since I wanted to be with you. To be honest, it hurts. She never wanted to be with me when I found out. But in 3 months she would be being married to me. Family members and acquaintances have already received invites. She was obviously with me since I could support her. She first seemed to regret it, but as soon as she realized that we were no longer going to be married and that I was going to throw her out of my house, the remorse and sorrow she had on the first day seemed to entirely go. She said she was going to move in with Brenda in an attempt to agitate me. She intends to move in with his brother Brandon, who is jobless, timid, and incapable of holding down a job. Both of them are planning to take advantage of Brandon, who is dependent on his elder brother. She didn't consider her affair carefully, I informed her. As she was ready to leave my place, I suspected my closest friend wouldn't jeopardize our friendship by letting her remain. She was dismissed, I reminded her. She responded by calling my company terrible and stating a lot of negative things about it. She has been receiving food from the same company for the previous month. 3 weeks later, she has taken 2 of our 4 dogs with her and carried the remaining of her belongings out of my house. She removed everything from our living room furniture to our bedroom, TV, dining room table, and more. She paid for part of it before we moved in together, and her godmother gave us others. So my house was in ruins. Nevertheless, she is stealing all that she can legitimately take. She told me that she and Brandon were in a serious relationship. Since I first saw them, they have remained intimate, and they keep seeing one another for a few weeks. She doesn't appear to regret her actions after moving out, and she seems to be enjoying her fun little affair with this unemployed, uneducated man who lives with his brother. After a while, their finances began to dwindle and they were both unable to find employment. I had provided her with all she could possibly require. I took care of her, even taking on the role of a parent, which I believe gradually diminished our love and affection for one another. However, my love for her is now a tragic tale, better left in the past. She suffers greatly from anxiety and depression and has been diagnosed with severe bipolar disorder. Over the past 6 years, I've tried my hardest to support her in her mental health, but I believe it has negatively impacted my own mental health. However, that was only one of the sacrifices I made since, for weeks following our breakup, I remained completely enamored with her. My closest friend didn't like her attempt to move in with Brenda. He kicked out both of my best friends when Brandon began smuggling her in behind their backs, and Brandon eventually returned to living with his mother. The rose-colored spectacles took almost 2 months to fall off before she recognized her error. She apologized over the phone, but I needed some time to process my thoughts since I felt that my trust had been broken. She had to move back in with her parents and begin looking for a job, so I believe that's the main reason she felt remorse. When I found her cheating, I was devastated. And she was devastated when the wedding was called off because her family received the majority of the invitations. She attempted to fabricate reasons for our breakup, even saying that we were cheating on one another. But I told the truth in a Facebook message to all of her friends and family members that I knew. Since I had already made down payments on some of the wedding costs, I suffered a financial setback. Within the previous several months, I've been putting myself first, spending time with loved ones, and beginning to put my life back together. I gave my former fiancé a lot of thinking. I was aware that I couldn't just forget what had transpired roughly 2 months prior. She suddenly stretched out to me. She once more expressed regret for her actions and acknowledged that she had committed a grave error. She expressed her desire to try to patch things up and that she still had feelings for me. She informed me that she had broken up with Brandon, asserting that this time would be different and that she would do whatever it took to mend our relationship. She recommended that we take our time and regain trust. I informed her that I had moved on and that no one was responsible for the treachery she had caused me. Began dating